Hello, today is April 14th, 2016. I'm meeting today with Mr. Philip Lucas at his home in Windsor, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Philip, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Well, thank you for coming by.
Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
I was born on July 17th, 1941,
And where were you born?
in a little town in northwest Ohio called Delphos, Delphos.
And any brothers and sisters?
Got one younger sister who's about 5 years younger.
Oh.
She's still living back there.
Okay. And what'd your father do for a living?
He was basically a laborer. He worked several places. In the little town of Delphos, there were basically 3 plants in town. One was a Fruhoff trailer plant. He worked there for a few months. And then the other one in town was what they called the New Delphos Manufacturing Company. And they made galvanized sheet metal products, gas cans, water cans, livestock feeders,
Okay.
turkey feeders, hog feeders, chicken feeders, things like that.
Okay. Yeah. So you grew up and went through the school system there in Delphos?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I say, I graduated from high school in 1959.
Okay. And then what'd you do once you got out of high school?
Okay, 3 days after I graduated from high school, I got on the train to go to the Cleveland Induction Center for my in-processing physical, where I was poked and prodded.
Well, now did you enlist or were you drafted
Yeah, I enlisted.
in the Marines?
Yes.
Now that poses the question of all the service branches. How'd you come to choose the Marines?
Okay, because initially, my whole life, I had an uncle that served in the Navy in World War II, and I had every intention of going in the Navy. And one of my high school buddies come up and said, he had talked to the Marine recruiter. He said, let's go in on a buddy plan. I was graduating from high school, and my folks didn't have the money to send me to college.
Sure, yeah.
And it's probably a good thing I didn't go to college then, because I was a little too flighty at the time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have succeeded.
Yeah.
Moving on. I did well in high school. And found out about the time I got out of boot camp, that the Bowling Green State University had offered me a full ride scholarship,
Oh.
and I wasn't there to take it,
Oh.
so I had to forego it.
I'll be darned. How was that? How was that transition for you going from civilian life into military life, particularly Marine military life? How was boot camp and that transition for you?
Yeah, okay. I knew very little about the Marine Corps,
Yeah.
except a little bit that the recruiter told me. And he wasn't necessarily dishonest or anything, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what to expect.
Right.
And like I say, in Cleveland, they put us on a Baltimore or Chesapeake and Ohio train for Washington, D.C. And it was all a bunch of Ohio and Michigan boys on that train, enlistees.
Now, I assume probably growing up, you probably hadn't traveled too far away from home. That was probably your first trip from home or away from home, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically.
Was there any?
The farthest I'd ever been, my dad had an uncle in Clarksville, Tennessee that we went to see once. And he was born in Michigan. And we used to go up and visit his family up there. Outside of that, a long trip for me was gone to Fort Wayne, which was 45 miles away. And that was a long trip.
Yeah, right. Now you're back over the East Coast. Was there a tinge of homesickness at all?
Not really too much. I was a little awestruck.
Yeah.
Because we got to Washington, D.C. and changed trains. It was there in Union Station in D.C. where we got on an Atlantic coastline train heading to Parris Island, South Carolina. And that was quite an experience. We got on that train heading to Parris Island, and it was full of kids from New Jersey, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, all the places where the cool kids lived.
Yeah, right.
Because when I was in high school, all the cool kids were on American Bandstand, and they were all Jersey kids, New York kids, and Philadelphia kids.
Okay.
And I never met any of those folks.
Yeah.
And I got on there, and I was kind of a little awestruck. But and they seemed cool to me. Because they immediately broke out the cards and started playing poker and shooting craps in the aisle on the train. And everything was fine. And I was just sitting here taking it all in. And all of a sudden, the conductor on the train, we'd made stops at several places, like Wilmington, North Carolina, Myrtle Beach, and what have you. And all of a sudden, he come through with a big bag, said, "Next stop, Yemassee, South Carolina." That's where the drill instructor from Parris Island picked up the new recruits. And boy, he come through that big bag, and all of a sudden all the cigarettes and everything went in the bag, chewing gum and all that stuff. Folks were emptying out their pockets of all the stuff that apparently their recruiter told they weren't allowed to have. Like I say, chewing gum, candy bars, cigarettes, and it all. And like I say, we all stepped down off that train. Biggest surprise in my life. I was talked to like my football coach never talked to me. You know, nobody had ever called me names like that in my whole life.
Oh boy.
Get on the yellow footprints, and they had yellow footprints down the walkway. Line up, asshole to belly button. Close it up, maggots. You know, and the whole thing, screaming and yelling. I'd never been screamed at my whole life like that. And I thought, did I make a mistake? Then for the next 16 weeks, we was down there at Parris Island, going through the whole training cycle. And the whole thing is, be it Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, or Army, the whole purpose of boot camp is to break you down and rebuild you the way they want you.
Right. I've always heard that they broke you down to just a puddle of clay and then remolded you into a Marine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I didn't know what to expect. And there were times throughout that next 16 weeks when I really wished I wasn't there and I was back home.
Oh boy.
You know, I think everybody goes through, hits that period of time when they say, what am I doing here?
Yeah. What did you, I guess kind of a two-part question. What did you think of your drill instructor then? What do you think of your drill instructor now? Or is that still the same thought?
Well, at the time I thought he was the cruelest human being that ever walked the face of the earth. That team of drill instructors, we had 4 of them
Oh.
that worked with us.
Now that you look back on it years later, what are your thoughts on him or that team?
They had a job to do, and they took me, just a raw recruit,
Right.
and turned me into a Marine,
Wow.
which, like I say, got a lot of respect for those folks. I didn't for a long time,
Yeah.
even after I got out of boot camp.
Yeah. So you finished boot camp. Did you have a furlough to come home, or take your story from finishing boot camp? Then?
Okay, finishing boot camp, we were assigned. And the thing is, I had scored really well on all the intelligence tests and things. I've always been a good test taker. And I scored real well on the test. And they turned around, said, "You're going to electronics school." And I said, "Okay." And they were telling us only the top 10% get selected for that technician's school.
Oh, wow.
And from there, I went on home for a 30-day leave. And from there, I went to the Naval Training Center at Great Lakes, Illinois, where I went through basic electronics school. Because at that time, the Marine Corps had 2 basic electronics schools, one at Great Lakes, the other at the Naval Station at Treasure Island in San Francisco.
Okay.
All the kids from Paris Island went
Gotcha.
to Great Lakes. The kids who went through boot camp in San Diego all went to Treasure Island.
Okay.
And I think we had about, I'm trying to remember, 16 weeks of school at Great Lakes. And when I graduated from there, I had orders to go on to the Marine Corps Communications Electronics School at MCRD in San Diego, Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And I had a buddy from Lima, Ohio, and this was 1959. He had a 1958 Ford Fairlane Crown Victoria. And Lima was only 15 miles from my hometown.
Uh-huh.
And we became buddies. We went through school together. He said, do you want to ride out to San Diego with me? I said, "Sure, I'll split the gas with you." He said, "Fine." So we left Great Lakes, loaded up our duffel bags and all our uniforms and everything into the trunk of his car. And we went down, it hit 66 where it starts in South Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And we rode Route 66 all the way to San Bernardino,
Wow.
almost the entire distance. And that was something that was kind of awesome, because the Route 66 TV show
Yeah.
was at the top of the ratings at that time.
Oh, wow.
And we went through all those places where they had their adventures. Not that we had much. We'd pull in, find a cheap motel, spend the night, get up and hit the road the next morning.
How many people can say they've taken that Route 66? So that's, wow, what a great adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I say, we took it until all of a sudden we crossed US 395, which drops south down to San Diego. We picked that up in San Bernardino, went down to San Diego, and that was quite an experience, because I'd never been to California before. And again, gone back, my experience with California was watching the party movies,
Oh, right, yeah.
Gidget and all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
You know, all these surfing movies,
Uh-huh.
that whole surfing culture.
Uh-huh.
We got out there to San Diego, and I was assigned to what they called the radio relay repair course, which was radio relay was basically telephone carrier communications. And we basically learned two different systems. And one was what we called the Mark 61, Mark 62, and Mark 63 bands. And they were actually little dog houses mounted on the back of a military 3/4 ton truck with two radios and a multiplexer in the middle. We could bring four trunk lines in from a switchboard into the van, and we'd broadcast them out on a VHF signal with a range up to 50 miles. And part of that radio, mobile radio set was also generated with two 5K gasoline generators in a trailer. That was our power. And that was enough to run all the communications equipment as well as a hot plate, what have you.
Now, when you were involved in communications, were you involved in the equipment part of it, or were you actually involved with transmitting?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both, yeah.
Because what we'd do, we'd come up with an assignment, and we'd usually set up at, say, the division headquarters, the CP, the command post, and we'd take the trunk lines, and then we'd broadcast out to the remote sites, and they would be at, say, a regimental headquarters, and they would also tie into their switchboard so that the commanding general could talk to every platoon commander in the division through our vans.
Wow.
Then the other system we had was the Marine Corps' very first microwave communications. It was a little set called a Track 27. It was a microwave set with a range of about 25 miles. And what it was really nice for, the way it multiplexed the signals. It could handle eight phone lines, plus it could handle data. And the place they were most often used was a unit that I later joined, which was what they called the LAM Battalion, the Light Anti-Aircraft Missile Battalions. They were Hawk Missile Battalions. And the thing is, we could pass fire control data through that little radio set.
Wow. Now, did you enjoy that? I mean, this is something you tested so well that they put you in. It doesn't sound like you requested it. Did you enjoy your work?
Yeah, I did. I really liked it.
Oh, good. Good.
Until, and the thing is, I graduated from school. And while I was going to school there in San Diego, we hit the beaches and the amusement parks, the whole thing. You know, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm. We'd go to all those because we'd get cheap tickets on the base. So we'd spend weekends. We could either go down to Los Angeles or stay around San Diego. You could spend a whole weekend in the San Diego Zoo and down to museums there in Balboa Park. And that made for just a cheap weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Because you'd take a 50-cent bus ride out to the zoo. And again, you get cheap tickets on the base. And like I say, and I don't know whether you've ever been there, but that zoo, you could spend a month in there and never see it all.
Oh, it must have been exciting for a northern Ohio boy. I mean,
Yeah.
to be in that environment.
Yeah.
Uh,
Never did learn to surf.
no. Wow.
And when I graduated from school there, I was assigned to 8th Comm Battalion at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So all of a sudden I went from the West Coast back to the East Coast. The nice thing there is if you could find a ride, it was close enough. It was about a 12 to 15 hour drive home.
Back up to Ohio?
Back up to Ohio.
Okay. Yeah.
And we used to, like I say, be able to find guys were always looking for riders to pay for gas.
Oh, right.
And you could always get a ride up there.
Whatever, I'm kind of going to go way back, but whatever happened to the buddy you joined the buddy system with?
He ended up coming out of boot camp. He ended up getting assigned to the Marine Corps Air Wing as a fixed wing aircraft mechanic.
Did you guys ever cross paths during your...
When I was at Camp Lejeune, he was at the Marine Corps Auxiliary Air Station at New River, North Carolina, which is attached to Camp Lejeune. They share a common fence on this south side of Camp Lejeune is the north side of New River. And we hooked up there a few times. And the first car I ever bought, I bought from him.
No, is that right?
It was a 1959 Vauxhall Victor. You ever heard of a Vauxhall? They were a British-made car sold by Pontiac dealerships in the United States. It was a little bitty four-cylinder thing. Little bitty two-door sedan. And by that time I'd gotten married.
Oh, well, talk about that. How did you meet your wife? And
she was my high school sweetheart.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah.
And we got married. And we were sitting here, had a year left to go. She didn't like Camp Lejeune at all. And I was kind of tired of it. I'd been there 2 years. And the thing is, if you're re-enlisted, you can have your choice of duty stations. And for some reason, don't ask me why, in a moment of madness, I said 29 Palms, California. Thinking 29 Palms sounds like a tropical paradise.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Till I got there. And it was out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
Nothing but mesquite trees, greasewood and cactus, and miles of sand.
Yeah.
And now it's right on the edge of Joshua Tree National Park. At that time it was the Joshua Tree National Monument. And I was assigned to 1st Land Battalion, Hawk Missile Battalion. And I was there. And I got there in August of '63. And in September of '63, we went on a missile shoot out in the desert. And that was a real interesting experience. Because what they'd do, they'd have these remote control drones. They were powered by a little four-cylinder air-cooled engine. And they'd fly at about 3,000 feet. And they'd circle them around, and the radar would pick them up, and then, and those missile launchers had three missiles mounted in a kind of a delta configuration on the launcher, and the launcher going what they called snap up into super elevation, and it tracked that drone as the radar tracked it. And then off it'd go. When it come off the launcher, it'd come off it'd fishtail, and then it'd lock on. Had a radar system in the nose of that missile, and it'd lock onto that drone. It'd get up to within about 100 feet of the drone, and the warhead would explode, knock that drone right out of the sky.
I didn't realize the Marines were involved with missiles.
Yeah. Yeah, before that, 1st Land Battalion used to be what they call 1st Man Battalion. It was another anti-aircraft missile battalion. It was a medium anti-aircraft missile battalion. This Terrier, which the missile itself was probably about as long as this room and about so big around.
Wow.
And they were strictly heat-seeking. The radar would get them in the vicinity, and then they'd fire, and the same thing, they'd fishtail, and then the heat seek would take over. And they kept telling stories about how all of a sudden they'd take off and head north, and the drones were supposed to be to the south and the west, and all of a sudden they'd head northeast, and they'd hit the destruct button. What they were doing, they were locking on airliners, flying from Chicago to Los Angeles.
Oh boy.
And they were blowing them up before they'd get there. So when they switched over to the Hawks, that was the main reason they dropped the Terrier. One of the main reasons was to avoid accidents, because they were completely radar controlled. Once the radar was locked on to the drone, the missile would lock onto the same target. And I was there, we were there I was there at 29 Palms with 1st Land Battalion. We come back off that missile shoot, and as soon as we come back, it was October of '63. And when we come back, I knew something was going on, because every piece of equipment we had broken, they went to one of the other 3 land battalions and pulled in working equipment to replace it. They told us, go home, pack your sea bag. You got 4 hours to be back here. And I just thought it was some mount-out exercise. We used to go through those when I was at Camp Lejeune. We used to pack up everything, and we'd quite often drive down to Wilmington or Morehead City to the dock. And they'd say, this is just a drill, go back. We go back and unpack everything. They'd just see how soon we get ready to deploy. And this time, they said, you got 4 hours to be back there. And I knew something was going on when they were replacing all our deadlined equipment. And all of a sudden, I knew it was something serious when all of a sudden they were transferring folks in from the other battalions into ours, so that we could come up to our table of organization strength. And they loaded us on 2.5-ton trucks, and we drove down to March Air Force Base, where they loaded us on C-130s.
Wow. Still hadn't told you anything?
Hadn't told us anything.
Yeah.
Didn't know what was going on. And we were sitting there, because at the same time this was going on, China and India were having some skirmishes up on the Tibetan border. And we didn't know whether we were going to Asia or what.
Right.
The first clue I had is one of the old civilians working on the flight line there. He said, when you get there, said you pull a couple of hairs out of that old bastard's beard and send them to me.
Ah, okay.
I didn't know what he was talking about. All of a sudden, I knew we were heading east, because the next stop was Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City to refuel. And we come back on the aircraft, and they piped the radio in, and it was Kennedy coming on, talking about them finding missiles in Cuba.
Wow.
So I knew what beard the old guy was talking about. He wanted to hear Castro's beard. And the next stop we made was at Cherry Point, North Carolina. And we come in and we set up there, and they redesignated. Instead of first LAM, we became second LAM as part of the 2nd Marine Air Wing. Things just kept changing. And we sent one battery of missiles to Guantanamo Bay. And the interesting thing, about 2 times a week, we'd send a flight down with repair parts and supplies for a team down there. And I made a few of those trips down. We'd come flying into Gitmo, offload the equipment, spend the night, climb on the aircraft, fly back to Cherry Point the next day.
Wow.
And the thing is, it's kind of, and the thing that I noticed, we had our gear set up on what they called Radio Hill, which was the highest point in Guantanamo Bay. And we had communications set up there between Cherry Point and Guantanamo. And like I say, Bob Hope took his Christmas show to Guantanamo that year.
Oh.
I didn't make that, but I did catch one of the jokes that he made. He said while he was there, he said he went up on Radio Hill, said he looked down and there was this fence, and there was a Marine on one side with live ammo and his rifle marching up and down that fence line. On the other side was a Cuban loaded up with his AK-47 going. And Bob Hope said one thing for sure, that goddamn fence wasn't going to get away. So then I was back on the East Coast where I re-enlisted to get away from.
Yeah, right.
And
from what you know on the inside, was it a pretty close call with the missile crisis?
No, I think we sent the Marines to Guantanamo as a show of force. And I think the politics of the whole thing. When Adlai Stevenson stood up in front of the UN, talked to the Soviet ambassador and said, when are we going to get an answer? He said, you're going to have to wait. And Stevenson said, I'm prepared to wait till hell freezes over. And we blockaded Cuba.
Right, yeah.
And the Navy stopped and boarded a Russian cargo ship and turned it back that was carrying missiles for Cuba. And I think that ended it all.
Oh, okay.
Gorbachev backed down.
Khrushchev.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Khrushchev.
Yeah.
The old shoe banger.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So with that crisis over then you went back to 29 Palms?
No, we stayed at Cherry Point.
Oh. Did your wife then join you out there?
Yes.
She was back where she didn't like it either, right?
Yeah, she was stuck in 29 Palms. Decided she wasn't that fond of it either. And we come back. And I was there. We were there another about till July of 64. I got orders to Okinawa.
Oh boy.
Which, as far as the Marine Corps was concerned, that was about the extent of overseas duty. And I never managed to make one at Camp Lejeune. Would have been a med cruise. Never. Took a couple of cruises down to the Caribbean, down to a little island off Puerto Rico called Vieques, where we ran field exercises. Didn't get to see much of Puerto Rico, except that little island stuck out there. I think it was about 5 miles wide and 12 miles long. Just a little dinky place. By the time you put a regimental landing team on it, it was just wall-to-wall troops.
Wow. So you get orders to go to Okinawa. Now, it was that an individual overseas assignment, or did your wife go with you?
No. There were no, at that time, the Marine Corps had no accompanied tours overseas.
Oh, okay.
She went back to Ohio and gave birth to my son. He was a month old when I got leave on the way back, and he was a month old the day I left Delphos.
Oh, that had to be tough.
Yeah. And when I got to Okinawa, I was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division, Comm Support Company.
Now, did you fly over, or did you take a ship over?
I took a ship over.
And that always begs the question, and here's an landlocked Ohio boy going to sea. Did you get your sea legs, or how was that trip over?
Yeah. The thing is, like I say, I'd been aboard a couple of LSTs to go to the Caribbean a few times. And the ship we were on was the General Edwin Patrick. It was what they called MSTS, Military Sea Transport System. And it was basically very similar to a commercial liner. It was a big ship. And we, in the embarked troops, or the troops gone overseas, were all on the decks below the main deck, all down below. And all the upper decks were military dependents heading to Japan and Okinawa.
Oh, okay.
Most of them, like I say, no Marines.
Right.
Army, Air Force,
Gotcha.
some Navy, maybe a few Marines on the way to Hawaii.
Gotcha.
We left San Diego, made one stop at Pearl Harbor to refuel. No Liberty didn't let us off the ship. Apparently they didn't trust us off the ship. We'd been cooped up.
Yeah. How long did that crossing take you? Do you remember, roughly? Do you remember?
Roughly, we're about 6 days into Pearl.
Oh.
From Pearl, it was another 2 weeks to Okinawa.
Oh, boy.
And we got over there. You know, I was there, like I say, I got there in July. All of a sudden in August, they had us pack up, go back aboard the ship. I went aboard an APA, amphibious, assault personnel amphibious. In other words, an amphibious troop ship.
Right.
And we left Okinawa, made one stop at Subic Bay in the Philippines. There we got liberty. Got back aboard the ship and then steamed off to the Gulf of Tonkin.
Wow. Did you know that's where, had they given you an idea where you were heading?
No.
Oh.
Like I said, I didn't know where the hell the Gulf of Tonkin
Yeah,
was.
right.
But it was in the news because the 2 destroyers had been fired on.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, you'd look out and you'd count 20, 30 ships around us.
Wow. That must have been a sight.
Most of them APAs and AKAs, amphibious cargo ships. And we had one aircraft carrier, the Intrepid, was with us. And several destroyers and cruisers.
Wow.
I couldn't tell you what they all were.
Yeah. That must have been a sight to see that out
Yeah.
on the horizon like that.
You look out, and what we'd do, we'd steam north till we could see Hunan Island, which is the southern edge of China.
Uh-huh.
Then we'd turn around, steam back south till we hit the Mekong River, turn around, head back north. We did that for 90 days.
Huh.
Talk about finally getting your sea legs. We went back to the Philippines on the way back to Okinawa. And you could tell everybody had been on those cruises because they wobbled down the street.
Oh, jeez.
Because it took a little while to get your land legs back.
So you traveled all that way and never hit the beach? You just
No.
just up and down?
Just up and down.
Oh,
And
boy.
it was real interesting. Played a lot of pinochle and canasta, some poker and shot craps.
Huh. Oh, boy. What was the whole idea? Just to show force, or what was the
Yeah, I think more than anything else, just to show a force, saying, hey, we're ready.
Oh, okay.
And then I got back in November,
Back to the States?
back to Okinawa.
Oh, okay.
Spent 1 month there. And on the day after Christmas, I went on board a C-130 back to Subic Bay, where I went on board the USS Mount McKinley, which was an amphibious group command ship. And on board we had 2 flag officers, a 2-star admiral and a 1-star general. There were about 40 of us Marines on there, communicators, in what they called the Marine Comm Detachment. And we took a bunch of equipment down and loaded on the ship. A couple of vans and a bunch of different radio sets, power supplies and things like that. Crypto gear, cryptography gear, which I can't talk about.
Wow. Huh.
Because I don't know whether the sets that we used are still in service now or not.
Huh.
But it was all top secret. And we had one, what we called a message center technician. He worked in the comm center, and they received all the communications that came in for either one of the admiral or the general. And we sat there at Subic Bay, tied up to a pier. I think the admiral probably had a girlfriend in town, because we never went to sea. We just sat there tied up, went on liberty every day. And the thing is, you could take 2 packs of cigarettes to town. That was all, because they didn't want them on the black market. But you take your 2 packs into town, and you could trade 2 packs of cigarettes for a gallon of Filipino rum.
Okay.
So you go get a gallon of rum, go out to a little bar that all us communicators frequented, buy us a half a gallon of Pepsi, sit here and drink rum and Pepsi all night, then head back to the base because we had to be back by midnight.
Well, now, was there any worries with you guys with your top secret clearance about being in town like that? And
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Just had strict orders. On dealing with the local nationals. Certain things we could do and couldn't do. That's the reason for the Cinderella Liberty. To make sure somebody didn't go out, fall in love, and spill his guts to his sweetheart.
Right.
Yeah, we pulled out of Subic Bay one time, and we went to Kaohsiung, Taiwan, for a CETO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, meeting that the Admiral had to attend. And I'm sure the General went to the meeting too. And we turned around and pulled in, and most of the guys went on liberty to see what Kaohsiung was like, just a different place. And I took the duty that night because I was broke. Some guy come up and asked to borrow money. I said, I don't have any, that's why I'm sitting here on the desk. So they went in, they come back, I said, how far is it into town? They said, maybe a mile. So the next night, I went on liberty, was gonna walk into town, and all of a sudden, one of these Sickalo drivers, these little bicycles with a little seat on the back, little 2-seat job. He come up and I said, no money. He said it's free. And I said, okay. He said, here, and he gave me a little coupon, good for 1 drink at this one bar. And what was so interesting about this, talk about a small world. I knew one lady from Cherry Point who was Taiwanese. Her husband had been on embassy duty in Taipei and married this gal. And I knew her pretty well. And and I went to this bar and was sitting down. And the lady that owned the bar come up and we got talking. Hey, I'll come up. She was this gal I knew in Cherry Point's sister.
Is that right?
Talk about a small world.
Yeah.
Go halfway around the world
Yeah.
to run in to Leo Bates' sister-in-law. And she, so she sat here, and okay, the hot spot in town was what they called the Army-Navy Club. And the thing is, it was a hot spot, kind of a dance hall. And all the young Taiwanese girls wanted to go there, but they could only go if they were accompanied by a U.S. serviceman. And she said, here's some money, take my daughter to the Army Navy Club. And she gave me a handful of new Taiwanese dollars. Enough to pay the Sickalo fare down there. So I rode this pedicab down. Took this gal down. We danced and had a couple of drinks. And then I took her back and they fed me dinner. And then I went back to the ship with a little bit of change in my pocket. And the guy who wanted to borrow money thought I'd lied to him.
Oh, right.
But I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
And we went back to Subic Bay. And all of a sudden our message center guy come in, our purple people eaters we called them. Because at that time, the only copy machines they had were mimeograph.
Oh, yeah.
And they had that blue ink.
Uh-huh.
And because he was in the communications center, he was constantly running that mimeograph. And he was inside that comm center, which was no sunlight. And he was just pale as could be. And he always had this blue tinge. And we called him a purple people eater. And all of a sudden, he come in one day and he said, we're going back to sea. On the way back from Kaohsiung, we went to Hong Kong. And he said, we're going back to sea. I said, how do you know? He said, I can't tell you. I said, okay. Sure enough, next morning, the tug come and yanked us away from the berth. We went out, and this was in March of 1965.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, they're loading me and my van, our vans, on these mike boats. LCM, we called them mike boats, landing craft, mechanized.
Mm-hmm.
They were just oversized landing crafts. They were big enough to haul our vans and things on, and they lowered them down with the cranes. And we headed ashore. And we went on into, and we landed at Da Nang, Vietnam. We were come to find out later, we were going in to set up communications for these regimental landing teams coming down from Okinawa. And they set us up on the edge of Da Nang Air Base. And we were housed in these old French barracks on the east side of the base there. Pretty nice accommodations. We knew they were left over for the old French colonial time, because in the head they had these old European style toilets, flush toilets with the tank way up and the pull chain. And everything was fine there. And we ended up sending vans out down from Da Nang down to Chu Lai and up to what they called Red Beach. Don't know why they called it Red Beach. Where we sailed out of Okinawa was called Red Beach. It was called White Beach. And there on Okinawa, everything is just old red dirt from all this ground up coral. And they called it White Beach, and it was all red. We got down there, and like I say, down there at Red Beach in Vietnam was all this sugar sand, this snow white sand.
Huh.
And we set up communication from there.
So did you guys land your equipment ahead of the main Marine landing force then?
Yeah.
Wow.
We were the first 40, quote, combat troops in Vietnam.
Wow.
Outside Army advisors.
Right.
And the other exception, there was a Marine helicopter squadron there that they called the Shoe Fly Squadron. And it basically was there to fly the advisors around and to taxi the Vietnamese troops. But we sat up there and everything was gone fine. And we were sitting there, just a bunch of scared kids.
Sure.
Not knowing what the hell to expect. Because they were giving us combat pay. Said that means shoot might be going on somewhere.
Yeah, right.
And the funny thing, the only shooting I ever saw was after the Marines had landed. We also had a detachment from 3rd Recon Battalion with us that also came off the ship for security. But we sat there on this Air Force base and everything was going fine. We were running around, trucking around, setting up our radio relay sites all up and down the coast until one of our radio operators got a wild hair and decided to go. He went around and we were walking guard duty with lime ammo. And this kid come around collecting all the magazines of ammo that he could get, stuffing them inside his flak jacket. He went out that night and stole the general's Jeep and headed up Highway 1. He had it in his head he was going to drive Hanoi and shoot Ho Chi Minh.
Oh, man.
He got as far as what they call Hai Bon Pass, which is about 15 miles north of Da Nang. When he got up there, the Army Special Forces had a checkpoint set up, and they stopped him. And the general wasn't all happy about it.
Oh, man.
And I think we were the only folks in Vietnam who every morning had to fall out in spit shine boots, starched fatigues, and stand in inspection by the commanding general every morning at 5:30. We were out there so General Karch could come by and inspect the communications section.
Oh.
And this kid ended up going back to Okinawa in chains. We all thought it was funny as hell. The general didn't think so at all. Then the other interesting thing, me and another kid that I'd been stationed with before at Cherry Point was on my team. Me and this kid Mike Powers took our little microwave set and they had us set up on top of what we called the White Elephant in Da Nang. It was, at that time, headquarters for the Naval Support Command, which handled all the beans, bullets, and butter coming in for all the Marines and Navy there. And we set up on the roof so we could have a clear line of sight back to the air base. And the first night, one thing that stands out in my mind, I don't think I'll ever forget. The first night we were there, we'd set up there on that roof, spread our sleeping bags out. We're sleeping on the roof. and there were a couple of cisterns up there. We just string wire between the cisterns and drape our pup tents over them. And that was our home, there on top of the White Elephant.
Huh.
And the first night there was all this banging going on. Didn't know what it was. Right across the street was a VIP pier landing where all the brass coming into town to the NSA, Naval Support Activity, would land there. But I heard all this banging out there on the pier. Didn't know what it was. Got up the next morning and there were 5 gallows set up. We turned around and said to Mike, what the hell's going on? He says, I don't know. Wasn't long till all of a sudden, up comes this Vietnam truck of what we call the white mice, which are Vietnamese national police. We called them that because they all wore white shirts and a white cap. And they were all little bitty folks. And they unloaded these 5 kids, I'll call them, young Vietnamese. I don't think any of them looked to be over 14 or 15. Marched them up and put the noose around their necks, tied sandbags to their ankles, and dropped the drawer and hung them.
Huh. Wow.
The sandbags, because they weren't heavy enough to hang.
Wow.
And when they were done, it come time to cut them down, up rolled this 3/4 ton truck, old military M37 type. And they turned around, cut these kids down, stacked them like cordwood in the back of that 3/4 ton. And it was already half full of bodies.
Wow.
I don't think I'll ever forget that.
Yeah.
I never want to see anything like that again.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then I was there until July. And I come back in July and went to Quantico, Virginia. Which I really enjoyed because I grew up in a family that hunted and fished constantly. And the thing about Quantico, there was some good fish in there. And first time I ever went turkey hunting, I didn't get a turkey, but it was down there in Virginia. And we used to go into D.C. on the weekends.
Wow.
And I was there not quite a year. And I got orders to go to what they call radio technician school, back to San Diego. It was an advanced electronics course. And it was a year long. And I was there in San Diego. Had my second child. A daughter was born there in San Diego. And when I finished that school, would have been September of '66, they sent me to Yuma, Arizona.
No way.
Marine Corps had an air station down there. I liked Yuma.
Oh, really? Yeah?
Yeah. Again, good fishing and some good duck and goose hunting.
Now, at this point, were you just still in a re-enlistment status, or had you made any decision as far as making it a career, or what was your thoughts?
Okay, by the time I finished this school, I was a sergeant. And while I was there, my 6-year enlistment was up. 62 to 68. And and I re-enlisted for 6 more while I was there at Yuma. And then I got orders again back to Vietnam.
Oh, boy.
And this is where it gets real interesting as far as Vietnam is concerned. Because when I looked at my orders, it said Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. And I thought, what in the hell are they sending me? I know nothing about broadcast radio and television. I basically know that you turn the dial, the station comes in, and you watch or listen. If you don't like what's on, you turn it and find another one. And I kind of questioned the orders. Said, Marine Corps sending radio technicians over as broadcast engineers. I said, how am I supposed to be a broadcast and television engineer when I don't know crap about it? They said, you'll learn. Because I was the tech chief there, again at another land battalion there at Yuma. And I'll not forget the day I left Yuma was the day Martin Luther King was shot.
Oh, wow.
And we, and the wife wasn't all that crazy about staying in Yuma. She wanted to go back to San Diego. So I took her back there, found her an apartment, and flew out of March Air Force Base to Saigon. Landed in Saigon, and got there in April of '68.
Now, had the Tet Offensive already happened yet?
Yeah, it was just winding down.
Oh, okay.
They were just cleaning up afterwards.
Okay.
Because that's the interesting thing. I got delayed in Saigon for 5 days. And the interesting thing, if I hadn't, I'd have been sent to the detachment in Way City. That was where I was supposed to go. But the thing is, because I got held up for an extra 5 days in processing there in Saigon, because they had to reissue all new uniforms with all the patches. Because I was one of the few Marines who in Vietnam wore patches on my sleeve. Because I was part of MACV, Marine Assistance Command Vietnam. And also I wore a AFVN, Armed Forces Vietnam Network badge. All new uniforms, new name tags. By the time they got all that done, it was about the 15th. And during that time, the Way Detachment had been overrun by an NVA battalion. And I wasn't there because I got stuck in Saigon.
Oh, man.
Talk about luck.
Yeah.
And instead I was assigned to Da Nang, which I knew that area.
Right.
And they sent me off to Da Nang. And our station, television station was on what they called Monkey Mountain, which is actually now the Son Tra Peninsula. Sits on a little peninsula that sits out in Da Nang Harbor. It's about a 3,500 foot mountain. We were about halfway up, about 2,000 feet up on the side of that mountain. We went up there. And I reported in and found out them broadcasters were all a different breed of cat. I'd never been in an outfit where they were so informal. PFCs were calling captains by their first name.
Oh, wow.
And master sergeants by their first name. But I got there and reported in. I met a Marine corporal who was another radio technician by the name of Max Rust. Hadn't been able to find anything on him. He was leaving in about 3 weeks. I was his replacement. He took me through, showed me the studio, the cameras, and we also had the FM studios, and the radio broadcast studios were there, with all the turntables, the cassette players, tape recorders, the whole thing. And we had then he took me out to what they called the van, which was basically the transmitter site. It was a semi-type van, about 50 feet long, and in one end of it was basically the television control room, and then about 2/3 of it was taken up with a television transmitter. I was used to working on transmitters that were like this, in field radios. Come in, this thing was 19 inches wide, 80 inches high. You go around to the back and you turn the doorknob, open the door, and there were the power finals in there. It was a 3,500 watt transmitter. It was sitting there, had 4 of these cabinets. One was the the audio, one for video, and another was one that basically modulated them all together and put them into the finals.
So exactly, then what was your job responsibilities to?
Okay, we ran from 6 in the morning till midnight. My responsibilities was to maintain that control room, which consisted of a bunch of gear in 19-inch racks. Things like sync generators. I didn't know what the hell a sync generator was, what a waveform monitor was. I didn't know what a composite video signal was supposed to look like for TV.
Wow.
And Russ sat down, told me what each of these did, where this part of the signal come from, and it come from here, and we had what they called the film chain. It was a 16 millimeter film projector and a carousel slide projector that fed into the control board. And then all the cameras in the studios all piped into this van.
Wow.
And ran in through this control board where you could run special effects, fade right, fade left, fade to black, split screens, the whole thing you could handle right there at that board. And I was there on a 13-month assignment. And we sat up there on the mountainside. And in that 13 months, the way the studio was built, the building was about 40 feet wide and 60 feet long. That was a television studio and 2 radio studios, as well as what we called the engineer shop, which to me was a tech shop. And then we had a newsroom with 3 teletypewriters. Routers, AP and UPI, were piped into us.
Wow. Must have been a fascinating position. I mean,
yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah. And all of a sudden, when my year was about up, I was finally figuring out what was going on.
Oh.
I was able to turn it on, fix what broke.
Ah.
I learned that the hard way. One rule I had was no food and drink on the console.
Sure.
Because that all started the day Max Russ left. It was me and this Navy journalist by the name of Bill Sample. We were there running the thing. And some Army journalist
Wow.
was out there with a cup of coffee and spilled it right down in the rack. Boy, he spilled it. And when he spilled it, boy, fuses started pop, 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 pop. Transmitter went down, bang. You could hear the first thing I did, I went back to our little shop, got me a piece of poster board, made a big old poster, said no food and drink in the control room, and put it up there. And we strictly enforced, if we come out, somebody had a pop can or a beer can, we'd open the door and dump it. Took us 3 days to get the station back on the air, with express courier flights coming up from Saigon. And
now a 13-month assignment, that was longer than the other service branches, right? Yeah.
Marine Corps had 13, everybody else was 12.
Why'd they do that? Any idea?
I don't know.
Huh.
But the thing was, I knew damn well if I went back then that they were going to turn around and I'd go back, say to Camp Pendleton or someplace, and in 6 months I'd be right back over.
Right.
With a combat unit where getting shot at was the norm. In that first 13 months, one time while I was driving down the road to the PX, I had a sniper bullet shoot over my head.
Oh, jeez.
And what we had was, for a vehicle up there, was a Jeep, an old M38 Jeep, old Willie's Jeep, World War II vintage. And we had a 1966 crew cab Dodge Power Wagon with a doghouse on the back and glass along there. And one time I had a sniper shoot out one of the glasses in the back.
Oh, man.
There's just something about a supersonic bullet going overhead. I had one guy describe it, it sounds like a bullwhip crack. Snap.
Oh, jeez.
And I figured that only happened to me once in a year there.
Wow.
So I went and extended my tour for 6 more months. For a 6-month extension, they turned around and allowed you 30 days of what they called a basket leave. Didn't count against your leave. It was free leave. Extend for 6 months. It was actually 7 months total time. 3 of it was spent on leave in the States. So I extended. Because also during this time, my wife had divorced me. And I had child support and a number of bills to pay. I had child support, I was in debt. So I was drawing overseas pay, combat pay. Never saw any combat. Like I say, that studio, the east side of it was up on stilts. And you could walk back in and it was about 8 or 9 feet tall. We got a better idea. We decided we were going to turn it into a club. So we went down, did some scrounging with the CB base at the bottom of the hill. And we come up and we dug out under there, managed to find us one of those old Coke coolers, one of the old chest type with the sliding top. We brought that up, it was about 8 feet long. And we hauled that up there. We dug out a place for it, got the CBs to come up with the ready mix truck and pour a pad in there. And then out there, they said, we'll fix you up right. Because what we were giving them was music. Because the thing is, PXs over there were selling Japanese-made electronics dirt cheap. All these Sony tape recorders, Panasonics, Yamahas, what have you. And and they'd buy these, but you couldn't get music for them. And we had this massive record library. And we go up and take a 7-inch tape. On a 7-inch tape, we put 12 hours of music on it. We get our DJs that sit in there and do nothing but make tapes. And we'd use them to swap. We traded those CBs. And they poured this pad that it started about 2 feet deep. By the time it went out on the mountains side and dropped down, it was about 4 feet thick. And then they framed in a shelter around it, plywooded it halfway up, then screened the top, put a sheet metal roof on it. So we had our club. We built a bar in there. And then beer, wine, and booze was all rationed. So everybody in the station, we'd pool our ration cards. We'd get 15 ration cards for 2 cases of beer a card. And we go down to the China Beach PX, buy 30 cases of beer. And 30 bottles of booze. And stock the bar. And somehow we got the reputation of being out of the 10 detachments in the network, we got the reputation as being the network casino in our club. Because we'd sit around, play dice, shoot craps, and we managed to come up with a roulette wheel, of all things. We always had 2 or 3 poker games going. Folks from all over the country would come up to Da Nang to gamble. And so after that 6 months was up, it was October of '68 by then. And I extended one more time. And I flew back to San Francisco catching a flight from San Francisco back to Ohio on what was then Western Airlines. It's now defunct. But we had a layover in Denver. And I went down to board my flight to Denver. And they said Denver's fogged in, the flight's delayed. So I went down there at San Francisco International. Hi, Tobes. Fergus. Toby and Fergus. They'll lick you to death. So I was there in the cocktail lounge, just passing time, visiting with the bartender. And I sat there about an hour and a half, nursing the beer. And and like I say, and all of a sudden I sat here, and I said to the bartender, said I haven't heard the intercom announce any flights. She said it doesn't work in the lounges.
Oh no.
I said, okay. So I went back down and said, what about my flight? She said, it's gone. I said, okay, can you get me on the next one to Denver? Said, because my bags were on that flight. She said, okay. So I went on in, got on the next flight, left in about a half an hour for Denver. Flew into Denver, and it was the 11th of October. And there were 28 inches of snow on the ground down at Stapleton. You know what that airport gets like when the weather's bad?
Yeah.
People all over the place. Nothing coming in, nothing going out. I think half the population of Denver was in that Stapleton airport. So I went down to baggage claim. No baggage. So I went down to the Western Airlines customer service. They said, oh, that flight didn't stop here, went on through to Minneapolis. Said, can you see if my bags are there? They checked, said, yes, they are. Said, what can I do? Said, we can have them flown back here tomorrow. It was as soon as the airport opens. I said, okay. Said, and I'm going, like I say, I had friends in Colorado Springs. And I said, okay. She said, what we can do, said we can get them in and we can put them on a Continental flight, which flies into Colorado Springs, and send them down on Continental, and they can deliver them by taxi. If you can give me an address. I gave her the address. Said, now, I got to figure out how to get to Colorado Springs. So I went out and tried to catch a taxi. No taxis. And I was standing there, and I finally hooked up with a soldier from Fort Carson who said he was going back to Colorado Springs, back to Fort Carson. I said, okay. I'll split a cab with you down to the bus station. He said, okay. So we finally managed to flag down an airport shuttle to take us to the bus station. It was a trailway station, downtown Denver. Mm-hmm. We got down there, we got tickets to Colorado Springs, got on that bus, headed south. snowing like hell. And we got down there, got to Castle Rock. It pulled off at Castle Rock through the bus station there. Pulled back on, as we were pulling on, the highway patrol was behind us, putting down the barricade. Went from Castle Rock to the Air Force Academy. Went in the north gate of the Air Force Academy. Highway patrol putting up the barricade. We come out of the south gate onto. Okay, when we got into Colorado Springs, I got on the phone, and I mean, must have been 3 feet of snow by then.
Oh, boy.
And I called my friends there. And it turns out their daughter had just gone down and put snow tires on her car, her little 1974 Plymouth Valiant. She said, I'll come down and pick you up. And normally a 10-minute drive. Took her half an hour, but she showed up, still no bags, had the clothes on my back. And when I left Saigon,
Oh, jeez.
it was 95 degrees
Yeah.
with 105% humidity.
Yeah.
And I was dressed about like I am now.
Yeah. Oh, man.
So she took me out to the house. And as luck would have it, her brother was in the Navy, had just gone off to the Navy. And so I wore a pair of his jeans. The only problem is he's 6'4". So I had him rolled up about this high. But it was better than the light cotton khakis that
You're
I
right.
had on.
Right.
And one of his shirts, sleeves rolled up. Thank goodness he was a little skinny guy. Wasn't any bigger around than I was. And he also had small feet. And I wore a pair of his cowboy boots. And to make a long story short, like you say, freshly divorced. And I ended up getting engaged to the gal that picked me up.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
That's right. She's downstairs right now.
Oh, wow.
She can continue some of this story.
Huh.
She's a little more understanding of my traveling around deployments and things in the military, because she spent more time in the military than I have. Because she was a military dependent
Right.
till she was 35 years old. Because her dad was retired Air Force. But anyhow, I went back to Da Nang for my next 6 months, at which time they'd had an error. I lost my job as a television engineer. They moved me out to the AM radio transmitter. We had a 50,000 watt transmitter, again back at Red Beach, where I'd been 5 years
Yeah,
before.
right. Yeah.
And it was interesting. Our transmitter, now these were big transmitters, these 50,000 watters. You could open up the cabinets and walk in them.
Wow.
You could stand inside them. And like I say, and everything else, like I say, in those things, for instance, for inductors, instead of having just a coil of wire, for coils, They were 1/2-inch aluminum tubes twisted around. I mean, they were like this. We had one transformer that we had to replace. It was about 20 inches high, 2 feet long, solid copper and laminated steel. Weighed about 400 pounds.
Now, was it hard with the climate and such? There, was it hard to maintain the equipment, or did the weather and climate play into the weather or the equipment at all?
Yeah. Because the thing is, one thing that I did that I wouldn't think about doing now, they couldn't pay me enough to do it. We had 2 towers for the AM transmitter. One was 300 feet tall, the other 275. It was supposed to have been 300. The story was that when they were building them, the tower company had a crane raising it up there, had a guy riding the last section up when the cable broke. Saying he grabbed the crane and was ready to bolt it in when the cable broke. He grabbed the 275-foot section, hung on, that other 25 come down, and when it hit the ground, it burnt like a pretzel. It laid out there in the sand for years. But we had beacon lights on the top. And even light bulbs on those suckers were huge. They were about that big around. The bases were like this.
Wow.
And we turned around and I spent 6 months out there. And that was probably the only place where I really earned my combat pay. While I was there, that 6 months I was there, went through 3 or 4 rocket attacks.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
All the other folks on the base used to blame us for the rocket attacks. They said they used those 2 beacon lights for aiming stakes. And I can believe it, because those rockets would go right between our towers.
Oh, wow.
And the other thing that was interesting, we were set up in this Butler building, this sheet metal building. The battleship New Jersey would sit offshore, and they'd fire them 16-inch guns, and they'd come over and it'd sound like a freight train passing over.
Wow.
And that whole building would shiver. And you'd hear that, and a minute later you'd hear boop, where the sound would finally get there. And they were just huge. And we used to sit out back and watch. You can see them land up on the hillside, 20 miles, 30 miles inshore.
Wow.
But outside of, like I say, spend a few nights out there in the bunker. When the rockets would come in, when the sirens would go off, we'd head to the bunker. We'd in there every time one of them rockets hit, go whoop. That sandbag bunker, sand had just rained down on you.
Oh, man.
So I ended up staying there till the middle of June out there. Middle of June, I flew back to Colorado Springs, picked up my fiance, and went back to Delphos, because that's where her dad was from originally.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, used to go to church with her grandparents.
Wow.
So we went back there and got married in the little church that I grew up in. And I had orders to go back to Marine Corps Commie-Lex schools in San Diego. Went back there and were there about 3 months, and they moved the school to 29 Palms. And I got back there wasn't anxious to go back.
Yeah.
She came back out to live with me. We had 2 daughters born in 29 Palms, one in 74, one in 71, one in 74. We got married in 70. And I spent 5 years there, then went back to Okinawa with Communications Company, Headquarters Battalion, 1st Marine Division. And after I left, after my 13 months there, I come back. So I missed the whole bicentennial celebration. The whole 1976, I was in Okinawa. So I come back in December of 76 and was stationed at Camp Pendleton with 3rd Amphibious Assault Battalion, or 3rd Amtracs, amphibious tractors. And that was all right. One thing that I wouldn't do, they could never get me to go in them floating coffins in the surf. Because the first day I was there, we were out watching them doing exercise, and saw one get caught sideways in the surf and just roll. Open top. They kept trying to convince me, I was a gunnery sergeant by then, they kept saying, Gunny, won't you go out and surf with us? No way in hell.
Oh, yeah.
And that was it. And I was discharged there in June of 79. And we come back. And
So you got your 20 years in then?
I had 20 years and 23 days.
Oh, wow.
But who counts? And like I say, we came back here, found a little house. Come back here, and I was planning on going to CSU. And as things would have it, about the time I was supposed to matriculate over there, I'd been accepted. The wife's grandmother died back in Ohio. And I didn't get into school.
Oh, boy.
So I came back, found a job, worked around, eventually enrolled over in UNC. Started at Ames, got my associate's degree at Ames, and then went on to UNC and got my BA in elementary education. Taught for 3 years down here at Skyview.
Oh, wow.
Taught 4th grade. Then when that didn't work out, I went to work. The wife was working for Sears Roebuck. And I went to work for Sears Home Services as basically a consumer electronics technician. Because with my television background,
yeah.
I could fix television sets, stereos, learn VCRs, home theater. And I was a real whiz with microwaves. Also did some small engine repair. That's what happened to these.
Oh, boy.
Got them caught in a lawnmower. It bit me.
How long then did you work for Sears?
18 years.
Is that right?
Then I retired from Sears in 2004. The wife got her 20 plus years with Sears and retired '06.
Okay.
And since then, we've just been sitting around here retired.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
She volunteers one day a week up at church.
So we'll start to wind down this interview then.
Yeah.
Phil, talk a little bit about family. So you've got what, 4 children?
Got 4 kids.
4 kids. Grandchildren, great grandchildren?
God, let me count. 10 grandchildren,
Wow.
2 great-great-grandchildren.
2 greats? Wow.
Kind of spread all over the country. My son's in Florida now. My oldest daughter's in Texas. Got one here in Windsor. She's an attorney here in town. And the other is living in Loveland.
Yeah.
She's the executive chef at the cafeteria up at State Farm, up on the hill.
Okay. Well, as we wind down this interview, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about, or any other stories that have kind of floated to the top as we've been sitting here talking, so that ideally we round out your story as best we can, or do you think by and large we got it?
Yeah, one of the other reasons, not only that I didn't want to come back to combat, was I staying over there in Da Nang at the TV station so long. Like I say, we built that club. We'd trade music for 66 pounds of Montford beef steaks.
Ah.
We had a 55-gallon drum cut in 2, made into a
Barbecue.
And we'd sit out there on that deck that the sea beast poured for us, drink beer and grill steaks, and sit here and watch the war go on.
Ah, wow.
2,000 feet up on the side of a mountain. Watch the war go on 20, 30 miles inland, up along the Allshaw Mountains.
Wow.
We'd watch the B-52s come through and do what they called arc lighting. They'd start on one end of the horizon, start dropping them 500-pound bombs all along till they went off the horizon on the other end. The reason they called it arc light, that's what it looked like. Just looked like flash bulbs going on.
Wow.
All
Wow.
along
What
there.
a sight that must have been. Well, now I've understood, though, since then, that they discovered that Monkey Mountain was riddled full of tunnels, that the Vietnamese had tunneled.
Not so much so. Although I always wondered. Because the thing is, our security was provided 2 ways. At the base of the mountain was an Air Force security squadron, APs. And right below our station, they had a little bunker set up. And then for us, got Yappy there.
Yeah, I get.
And then for us, we always had a team of 3 Marine Corps dog handlers, and their sentry dogs up there, and they walked the road. And supposedly, that mountain was secure, but you could go out any day, look up and down that mountain. You could see the smoke going up from the charcoal burners up there.
Oh, wow.
They'd come up and cut the trees and burn them down to charcoal, take it down and sell it on the streets. And you know damn well if charcoal burners could get up there, anybody else could.
Yeah, right.
The other interesting thing going up the mountain, about 500 feet above us, there was an F-8 Crusader buried in the side of the mountain. The story was, The two of them took off. The aircraft carrier Riscony, a Navy pilot and a Marine pilot, flying those F-8s. Somehow they ran into problems. The Navy pilot landed in an egg. The Marine flamed out, crashed into the side of the mountain, buried it up to within, you had about 1/3 of the tail sticking out, with the stencil Marines across the tail.
Huh.
To this day, I imagine it's still up there.
Now, would you ever have any desire to go back to Vietnam?
I'd love to go back and see what our station site looks like today.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's all overgrown.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they turn around, stripped anything they could for the lumber and the sheet metal and things. Yeah, like I say, we'd sit up there, watch the war go on.
Wow. Wow.
The war was entertainment for us.
Yeah. Well, Philip, we'll wind down this interview. I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you. That was given to me by the officer in charge, Captain Joe Leonsky, from Detachment 2, AFVN Da Nang, Channel 11 Television, 99.9 FM and 850 AM. The inscription says, presented to Staff Sergeant Philip E. Lucas, USMC, by the staff of AFVN Detachment Number 2 Da Nang for exceptional, outstanding service from April 15, 1968 to 10 June 1970 as Engineer and Transmitter Chief.
Yeah.